Julian Ashford swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, the noise of the exclusive club fading into the background. His business rival, Damien Sterling, leaned across the mahogany table with a mocking smile. Damien had just wagered $2 million and the controlling shares of a shipping company that Julian could not take a complete stranger, someone utterly devoid of social standing, and successfully present her as his wife at the upcoming global summit. Julian, driven by an intoxicating mix of arrogance and boredom, accepted the bet without a second thought. For him, people were merely assets to be acquired, polished, and deployed. The very next afternoon, Julian found himself walking into a small, worn-down diner on the edge of the financial district, following up on an obscure advertisement for temporary corporate assistance. Behind the counter stood Sienna Hayes. She was wiping down the laminate surface with quiet dignity, her posture straight despite the faded uniform. When a loud, belligerent customer demanded a free meal, Julian watched in mild surprise as Sienna firmly but politely put the man in his place, her eyes flashing with an intelligence that did not belong in a roadside diner. Intrigued, Julian waited until the diner emptied, approached the counter, and laid out his proposition. He offered her a marriage of convenience. 6 months of pretending to be his adoring wife in exchange for a sum that would change her life. Sienna did not gasp. She did not express gratitude. She simply looked at him, noted the emptiness behind his expensive suit, and agreed, setting terms of her own regarding her personal boundaries. The wedding was a sterile affair, held in the cold, cavernous hall of a city registry. When Julian presented her with a massive, ostentatious diamond ring, Sienna politely pushed the velvet box away. She insisted on a simple, inexpensive silver band, stating quietly that she refused to be branded like one of his corporate acquisitions. Julian felt a strange flicker of annoyance, entirely unaccustomed to being denied. From the back of the room, Penelope Ashby, Julian's manipulative ex-fiancée, watched the brief ceremony with narrowed eyes, whispering poison into Damien's ear about the mysterious new bride. Life in Julian's penthouse was a battlefield of silent wills. Julian tried to control her schedule, her wardrobe, and her public statements. Sienna pushed back at every turn. During a tense dinner, she looked around the opulent dining room and told him directly that he lived in a beautifully decorated vault, entirely devoid of warmth or actual human connection. Her words stung his pride, but they also lingered in his mind. The coldness between them cracked only once, on a rainy Tuesday when Julian collapsed with a severe fever. Sienna did not call his staff. She stayed by his side through the night, placing cool cloths on his forehead and making a specific, soothing ginger tea. In the quiet darkness of the bedroom, Julian experienced a rare moment of vulnerability, realizing that her hands were the first gentle touch he had felt in years, but the fragile piece shattered weeks later in his private study. Sienna stood by the window, the city lights casting long shadows across her face, and finally confessed the truth. She was not just Sienna Hayes. She was Sienna Whitfield, the sole heir to the disgraced Whitfield empire that had collapsed in a highly publicized scandal years ago. She had renounced her wealth to escape the corruption of her family. Julian was furious. He felt foolish, realizing that the nobody he thought he had hired was actually a ghost from the upper echelons of his own world. The confrontation was painful, words thrown like daggers, exposing the deep wounds of her past and the fragility of his control. A heavy silence descended upon the penthouse in the following weeks. They barely spoke, passing each other like strangers in the hallway. Yet, Julian found he could not simply erase her from his mind. In an attempt at silent apology, he began leaving small tokens. Not jewelry, but a box of her favorite blend of tea on the kitchen counter, or clearing his impossible schedule just to be in the same room while she read. Sienna noticed, her heart softening at the quiet gestures that proved he was listening. Their tentative reconciliation was violently interrupted by Damien Sterling. Damien had dug into Sienna's past and uncovered her identity. At the grand charity gala, surrounded by the elite of the city, Damien took the microphone. He attempted to humiliate Julian, announcing to the room that the great Julian Ashford had married a fraud, a broken heiress from a ruined family. The room fell into a dead silence. Sienna did not run. She stepped up to the podium, her head held high. With a calm, unwavering voice, she admitted her heritage, but then she turned the tables. She revealed the financial documents she had meticulously gathered while living in the shadows, documents that proved it was Damien Sterling who had orchestrated the illegal trades that ruined her family's name. The crowd gasped as the truth echoed through the ballroom. Damien stammered, his face pale as investors physically stepped away from him. He was completely exposed, his reputation crumbling in real time as security was called to escort him out. Later that night, the penthouse was quiet once more, but the coldness was entirely gone. Julian took Sienna's hands, looking at her not as an asset, but as his equal. He apologized, his voice thick with genuine emotion, asking her to stay not for a contract, but because his world meant nothing without her in it. Sienna smiled, finally letting her walls down, and agreed to build a new life together, grounded in truth. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories. We will see you next time. Sebastian Kane stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his boardroom, the city stretching below him like a concrete kingdom. The words of his late father's attorney still echoed in his mind, delivering a bizarre and infuriating ultimatum. To inherit the controlling stake of Kane Enterprises and prevent it from falling into the hands of his reckless, resentful sister Delphine, Sebastian had to marry before his 35th birthday. That gave him exactly 3 weeks. He had spent his entire life building the company, and he refused to let a ridiculous clause tear it away from him. He needed a wife, someone compliant, someone who understood the transactional nature of his world. Storming out of the executive elevator late that evening, his temper flared when he saw the reception desk still occupied. Vivian Reed, a quiet and fiercely diligent employee who usually went unnoticed, was organizing a stack of complex legal files. When Sebastian snapped at her for remaining in the building after hours, Vivian did not flinch or apologize profusely like the others. She calmly locked eyes with him, handed him the specific folder he had been tearing his office apart to find, and stated she needed the overtime pay. Intrigued by her steady composure and the quiet desperation in her voice, Sebastian made an impulsive decision. He offered her a heavily compensated temporary marriage contract to satisfy the board and his father's will. Vivian hesitated, her grip tightening on the edge of the desk before quietly agreeing. The ceremony was a brisk, sterile procedure held in the sprawling gardens of the Kane estate. As they signed the extensive legal documents, Vivian flatly refused the limitless credit cards and extravagant allowances Sebastian pushed across the table. She firmly stated she only wanted the exact fixed amount they had agreed upon for a personal debt, refusing to explain further. From the terrace above, Delphine watched the proceedings with a bitter sneer, her eyes narrowing at the modest, unassuming woman who now stood between her and a billion-dollar empire. Life in Sebastian's austere mansion quickly became a battleground of stubborn pride. Sebastian expected her to quietly blend into the background, but Vivian challenged his endless demands. During a tense breakfast, she boldly pointed out that his massive home felt more like a mausoleum than a place to live, exposing the hollow reality of his work-obsessed existence. Yet, beneath their verbal sparring, an undeniable current of attraction began to hum. Sebastian caught himself watching her read in the library, and he noticed with a strange tightness in his chest how often she seemed to pause, catching her breath with a faint, trembling hand pressed to her chest. The truth came crashing down on Sebastian when a confidential dossier arrived on his desk. His private investigator, originally hired to ensure Vivian had no hidden scandals, uncovered a closely guarded secret. Vivian was not in financial debt. She was suffering from a rapidly deteriorating heart condition, and the money from their arrangement was meant to fund an experimental, highly expensive surgery she desperately needed to survive. Sebastian felt a violent clash of anger and profound fear. He was furious that she had hidden something so critical, yet terrified by the fragile reality of her health. Unable to process his own emotions, Sebastian withdrew behind a wall of icy professionalism, communicating in short, clipped sentences. But his actions betrayed his cold demeanor. Vivian began finding specialized medical journals left open on her reading chair, and her calendar magically cleared as top-tier cardiologists arrived at the mansion for private consultations, entirely funded and arranged by a silent Sebastian. He could not say the words, but he refused to let her fight alone. Sensing a weakness, Delphine struck. She had bribed a clerk in the legal department to obtain a copy of the marriage contract and discovered Vivian's medical records. Delphine called an emergency meeting with the board of directors, planning to expose the marriage as a fraudulent transaction and mock Vivian's illness as a liability, intending to void the inheritance clause entirely. As Delphine stood before the board, gloating with the documents in hand, the double doors swung open. Sebastian entered, his arm wrapped protectively around Vivian, who stood tall despite her pale complexion. Sebastian did not bother to defend the fake contract. Instead, he ripped his copy to shreds in front of the silent room. He declared that the arrangement was over, replaced by a genuine, unbreakable commitment to the woman beside him. Before Delphine could recover, Sebastian tossed a thick file onto the center table, exposing a trail of embezzled company funds that Delphine had used to finance her coup. The board erupted in outrage. Delphine was stripped of her shares and immediately escorted out of the building by security, losing her family, her title, and her wealth in a matter of minutes. That evening, in the quiet warmth of their home, the corporate armor finally fell away. Sebastian sat beside Vivian, holding her hands, and offered a sincere, trembling apology for his pride and his silence. He promised to stand by her through every hospital visit and every moment of her recovery, offering his heart completely. Months later, the cold skyscrapers of the city were nothing but a distant memory. Vivian, healthy and radiant, walked barefoot along the sunlit terrace of a Mediterranean villa. Sebastian had stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to a trusted committee, choosing a life of peace and genuine connection over the relentless pursuit of power. They watched the ocean together, having left their old world behind to build a new one entirely their own. If this story brought a smile to your face, please share it with a friend who loves a journey of healing and true romance. Subscribe to our channel to hear more incredible stories of love conquering all. We will see you in the next chapter. Theodore Lang paced the length of the ancestral library, the heavy oak panels seemingly closing in on him. His grandfather, the formidable patriarch of Lang Global, sat behind a massive desk and delivered an ultimatum that left no room for negotiation. Theodore had exactly 1 month to find a respectable, grounded woman to marry, or the old man would transfer the controlling shares of the family empire to Theodore's notoriously incompetent cousin. The grandfather was tired of Theodore's endless parade of superficial socialites and wanted stability. Cornered and furious at being manipulated, Theodore realized he needed a wife who could play the part of a saint, someone entirely disconnected from his world of corporate ruthlessness. The next morning, fate presented a chaotic solution. While rushing out of a community center his company was heavily publicizing for a tax write-off, Theodore collided with Margot Ellis. Margot was a dedicated elementary school teacher, her arms full of carefully constructed science projects that now lay crushed on the pavement. Instead of being intimidated by his tailored suit and the surrounding security detail, Margot furiously reprimanded him for his carelessness, pointing out the hours her young students had spent on their work. Theodore was struck by her fierce protectiveness and lack of pretense. Later that week, after a background check confirmed her spotless, ordinary life, he arrived at her modest classroom after hours. He proposed a strictly business arrangement, a temporary marriage that would secure his company and provide a massive donation to her underfunded school district. Margot looked at the arrogant billionaire with clear distaste, but the thought of a secure future for her students made her reluctantly agree. Their wedding was a highly publicized but emotionally barren event, a perfect illusion for the cameras. When Theodore attempted to move her belongings into his minimalist, ultra-modern penthouse, he presented her with an entirely new designer wardrobe. Margot quietly folded the expensive garments and left them on a chair, opting to wear her own simple dresses. She told him that she was there to fulfill a contract, not to become another one of his expensive possessions. From the edge of the ballroom during their reception, Clarissa Wade, Theodore's wealthy and vindictive ex-fiancée, watched them with a venomous glare. instantly recognizing that Margot did not belong in their elite circle. Living together was a constant clash of values. Theodore operated with a cold, calculating efficiency that Margot found deeply unsettling. During a heated argument over a ruthless corporate takeover Theodore was orchestrating, Margot looked him in the eye and told him his entire life was a monument to greed, completely empty of real purpose. Her words pierced through his usual indifference. Still, they found themselves drawn to one another in quiet moments. Theodore found himself lingering near the kitchen just to hear her hum while she made dinner, a sound that brought a strange, unfamiliar warmth to the massive penthouse. The fragile connection shattered when Theodore stumbled upon a box of old documents in Margot's closet. He recognized the logo immediately. It was the crest of a small educational publishing company that Lang Global had aggressively acquired and dismantled a decade ago. When he confronted her, Margot did not yell. Her voice trembled with deep, unresolved pain as she revealed the truth. Her father had owned that company. The hostile takeover had bankrupted him, destroying his health and tearing her family apart. She had agreed to the marriage to take his money and funnel it back into the community he had helped destroy. Theodore stood in stunned silence, the devastating human cost of his family's legacy finally staring him in the face. Guilt consumed him, and a heavy distance grew between them. Theodore knew he could not fix the past with a check. Instead, he began acting in the shadows. He quietly halted a major development project that would have displaced a local neighborhood, and he spent a rainy Saturday morning personally repairing the leaky roof of Margot's community center, refusing to let his public relations team document a single second of it. Margot arrived to find him covered in dust and paint, his usual arrogance replaced by quiet, exhausted determination. It was the first time she saw the man beneath the billionaire armor, and her guarded heart began to soften. However, Clarissa Wade had been busy plotting her revenge. She had hired someone to secretly record a conversation where she tried to bribe Margot into leaving Theodore. Clarissa expertly edited the audio to make it sound as though Margot was confessing to being a gold digger who planned to extort the Lang family before abandoning Theodore. At the highly anticipated Lang Global annual charity gala, Clarissa hijacked the audio system, playing the manipulated recording for hundreds of elite guests. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Margot stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, humiliated and exposed. Before Clarissa could gloat, Theodore calmly walked to the soundboard. He took the microphone, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He stated that he had anticipated Clarissa's sabotage and had his security team sweep the venue earlier. He pressed a button, playing the unedited, full recording over the speakers. The true audio clearly featured Clarissa offering the bribe, and Margot firmly rejecting it, defending her integrity and expressing a genuine growing affection for her husband. The tables turned instantly. The elite crowd glared at Clarissa in profound disgust. Stripped of her dignity and social standing at the very event she sought to dominate, Clarissa was swiftly escorted out by security, her reputation ruined forever. Theodore walked through the parting crowd until he reached Margot. Ignoring the hundreds of watching eyes, he took her hands and offered a deeply sincere apology, not just for the spectacle, but for the pain his family had caused hers in the past. He promised to dismantle the predatory divisions of his company and begged her to stay, not as a contractual obligation, but as the only woman he would ever love. Margot looked into his eyes, saw the absolute truth in them, and finally closed the distance between them, forgiving him completely. A year later, the cold penthouse had been transformed into a vibrant home filled with light and laughter. Margot stood at the entrance of her brand-new state-of-the-art educational foundation, a project she had built from the ground up, with Theodore's unwavering support and funding. He stood proudly by her side as she cut the ribbon, their hands intertwined. They had turned a legacy of ruin into a future of hope, facing the world together. If this story of redemption and true love inspired you, please share it with someone who appreciates a meaningful romance. Subscribe to the channel to never miss our upcoming tales. We will see you next time.